Over the last couple of weeks, Danny and I have been diving in, tackling the running back and wide receiver classes in the 2025 NFL draft. Well, today we're going to break down a first round Dynasty rookie mock draft to give you guys a pretty good idea of how we value these players, where they stack up, where the position groups are strong, where the position groups are weak. We'll do this, of course, from a super flex standpoint, and we will try to keep it relatively brief on these players because we did go in depth in the wide receiver and running back videos. So if you want more information on these prospects, we will link those videos down below in the description. So should be a fun one. Danny's going to be picking from 101. I'm going to be picking from 102. Danny, I'll let you kick things off with the 101. A lot of directions we could go. We broke down the top of the wide receiver board, how strong it can be. The running back class, of course, has some potential first rounders in it. Which direction are you going to go with the 101?
Yeah, to me, if you're making a 2025 early mock draft at this current point, with the knowledge that we have, with the prospect profiles we kind of have underway, not to mention our own film evaluation on these guys, there's one direction I have to lean. It has to be to the wide receiver from Missouri, Luther Burden. And when you're looking at Luther Burden, I mean, analytically, this guy checks out. 91 PFF receiving grade in 2023, which was first among the wide receivers that I watched. 3.29 yards per route run, second amongst the guys that I watched. We're talking about a guy that can do it against both man and zone. 89.5 PFF receiving grade against man, 90.2 PFF receiving grade against zone. And when you watch Luther Burden, he jumps off the screen to you. Again, the only real con I have at this point is that 81.7% of his sampled routes were in the slot, but it's hard not to see the Jamar Chase comps, the way he attacks the ball, the way that he's fluid in the open field, breaking tackles both with power and with elusiveness, man. This guy profiles to be a number one overall wide receiver at the next level. According to NFL mock draft database, he's currently projected to go in the top 10 of the NFL draft. And I currently have a top 10 talent grade on him. I have him as a 90.0, and I think he's the rightful 101 at this point in the process.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, in the prospect model, he stacks up very similarly to Jamar Chase when he was coming out of LSU. Of course, Jamar Chase didn't play his final season, so it's actually a pretty apt comparison comparing a sophomore to Jamar Chase's prospect profile. My comp for him was Malik Nabers because of that slot presence that you mentioned. Actually, Malik Nabers did play a lot out of the slot at LSU, so that's why I kind of see those two guys as very similar. But Luther Burden, like you said, lightning fast, very physical, electric in the open field with the ball in his hands. The route tree is something that we want to see probably be, facilitated this year. We want to see him run a little bit more or less of a Mickey Mouse route tree because he was running a lot from the slot, running a lot of screens. I believe one of the analytical benchmarks that he missed, actually the lowest percentage of targets that excluded screens this year. So 64% of his targets this year were not screens, which means that a lot of his targets were screens. So that is the thing we want to see corrected with Luther Burden this year. Run a more diverse route tree. 9.1 ADOT, also not very good as well, but checks every other box analytically. He's a great athlete. He's got good size. Definitely going to put up numbers in terms of an overall target share, in terms of yards after catch numbers. He is a great prospect for sure. Probably would have been wide receiver 3 in this year's class behind Marvin Harrison and Malik Nabers, and probably would have been better than Odunze, which is saying a lot because Odunze was a great prospect worthy of being wide receiver 1 in many other classes.
Yeah, and who knows, maybe after his upcoming junior year, once we compare him to that of Malik Nabers, Marvin Harrison Jr., he may even stack up even closer because, to be honest, I mean, when you're just looking at the profile as a whole, yes, does he have a ways to get to that level of prospect? We want to see him play more snaps on the outside, like I said. Like you said, you want to see him more run a more diverse route tree. Absolutely, but in terms of where he could be at after his sophomore campaign, he's checking every single box.
Absolutely. So there is a decision point for me at 102. I think a lot of people will just, default Tedero McMillan, Arizona wide receiver. For me, I believe RB1 in this class, whoever it ends up being, will probably be the selection behind Luther Burden and maybe even ahead of Luther Burden at 101. Because for me, Ashton Jeanty, running back of Boise State, stacks up as a prospect that will go in the first round of the NFL draft. I've seen numerous NFL draft analysts, Dane Brugler, Ian Cummings, a number of other guys say that this guy's a first-round talent. He is the potential to be Jahmyr Gibbs with 15 pounds of muscle or Alvin Kamara 2.0 with better speed. This is the profile we're talking about. We're talking about a guy that stacks up analytically as well as any prospect in recent memory. Honestly, he has a chance, if he gets first-round draft capital, to be that of a Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey level prospect. Aside from the level of competition, playing at Boise State, non-Power 5 conference, as well as maybe there's some weight concerns that the 215 that he's listed at is maybe not his actual weight. There is nothing that this guy doesn't check the box on. He makes people miss. He's an electric receiver, 2.58 yards per route run. For reference, that is over 1 yards per route run, better than anybody else in this class. So this guy is an electric receiver. His receiving grade, Jahmyr Gibbs and Christian McCaffrey, the only other running backs to come out with over a 90 PFF receiving grade. So a 3-down back in today's NFL goes a long way. Like Jahmyr Gibbs, Ashton Jeanty, these type of dudes, the second they get drafted in the first round, we're talking top 5 dynasty running back. And as good as Teteroa McMillan is, I have a little bit more concerns about his ability to separate consistently at the NFL level. He's a bit of a wonkier size profile that could factor in maybe to some durability concerns for me. So in my opinion, RB1, whoever it ends up being, should go ahead of him. And for me, that's Ashton Jeanty as of now. But of course, draft capital, how the season goes this year, all of that could change. But the Boise State running back to me was the best one that I watched. And he also stacks up the best in the prospect model as well. His best comparable prospect is Christian McCaffrey, not even Jahmyr Gibbs Kamara. He clears those guys pretty comfortably. His best comparable prospect is Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, I mean, when I went through his tape, the only real weaknesses I had on him were Boise State, aka level of competition, not the most physical blocker. Again, at this point, he's a little bit undeveloped as a blocker. Not to say he's an awful blocker compared to some of the running backs in this class, but when you're trying to nitpick weaknesses on this guy, you have not the most physical blocker and trusts his talent a bit too much at times. When you watch this guy play, it's honestly magical because the way he's able to break tackles, the way he's able to absorb contact, the way he's able to contribute both between the tackles and in the receiving game, man, this guy's the full package. Second highest PFF rush grade in college football in 2023, 94.6, highest amongst all the backs that we watch in our summer scouting profiles. Fifth highest yards after contact per attempt in the NCAA, 82 missed tackles forced on 217 carries. So you see the profile of the tackle breaking ability when you also combine it with 37 10-plus yard runs and a 3.19 yards per row run in the NCAA this past season. It's easy to see why this guy is worth a top 3 overall pick if we're projecting to the 2025 rookie drafts. But I love Ashton Jeanty. Again, if you hadn't picked Ashton Jeanty, he would have been gone off the board at 103. The guy that people would have expected maybe to go at the 1 or 2 slot, a guy that's kind of viewed, neck and neck at this point with Luther Burden. You reference him. I'm going to talk about Tet McMillan, wide receiver of the Arizona Wildcats. He's kind of this big throwback wide receiver, the big 6'5", 210-pound frame. I watched him in 2023 against USC, Arizona State, and against Oklahoma. And the notes that I have listed here: strengths, fluid mover, despite being this taller wide receiver, navigates through traffic extremely well. Again, you see this big hulking size, 6'5", 210. You're assuming they're, like the Johnny Wilson type of profile where they're a big receiver and they can either attack the ball down the field or they can play that power slot role. With Tet McMillan, I see a true 3-level threat. Again, especially against man coverage. We'll talk a little bit about his weaknesses against zone at this current point of his college career. He absolutely beats man. Again, we'll talk about some of his weaknesses going up against zone coverage in a second. But with Tet McMillan, you want to see a freshman to sophomore jump like Tet McMillan showed, going from, a 700-yard, 7-touchdown receiver in his freshman year to being one of the leaders in the Pac-12 conference. Really, again, like I said with Luther Burden, projected top 10 NFL draft capital at this current point, according to Mock Draft Database. When you're talking about his efficiency metrics, 89.1 PFF receiving grade, 2.79 yards per route run. And like I said, a little bit better than against man than zone at his current point, 91.4 PFF receiving grade versus man, which is even higher than Luther Burden. But unfortunately, compared to zone, 2.52 yards per route run against zone versus 3.94 against man. So again, love Tet McMillan. My comp for him would be a guy like Drake London. And after this upcoming junior season, you could even make the claim that he has maybe even better profile than what Drake London had coming out a couple years ago.
Yeah, I mean, he already stacks up quite well with Drake London and with Romo Dunze, 2 guys who are bigger receivers, a little bit thicker than Tet McMillan. I'd like to see him add like 10 pounds of muscle because I do think it would help his game, because the best thing that Tet McMillan does on the field is what he does at the catch point, separating late hands, the type of guy that you throw it up to him and he goes up and gets it. And having 55 contested catch opportunities on 214 targets is mainly the biggest concern I have with Tet McMillan, where I want to see him separate more consistently. A lot of that is due to maybe some inexperience working against zone coverage, as you kind of alluded to there. Tet McMillan also, with Jacob Cowing now off to the NFL, who, believe it or not, was a very high target commander at Arizona alongside Tet McMillan there. I do want to see his efficiency. His yards per route run career number is 2.14. You want to see that increase a little bit, as it often does. usually people aren't producing this high of a level as freshmen and sophomores. Usually junior year is the best season that we see from these guys. And also his career targets per route run, just 21.55%. That's about middle of the pack in this class for a guy that is expected to be the wide receiver 2 in this class. You want to see that number a little bit higher. And like I said, with cowing off to the NFL, that should be a big time boost to his overall target share, his overall target numbers. So for me, there's just a couple minor concerns that keep him behind Genty as my RB1. So for me, I'd take Tet McMillan around 103. And I think that's a fine option. I mean, we're talking about a prospect who's going to probably stack up pretty well with what Rome Odunze represented this year as a guy you were getting, 106, 107. That kind of speaks to the lack of quarterbacks in this class. We are doing this from a super flex frame of mind. And we haven't even mentioned a quarterback yet, but Tet McMillan's still a great 103.
Yeah, and not to mention Tet McMillan being a bigger bodied receiver, like you said, is absolutely not a finished product at this point. If he just continually gets better in terms of his separation, especially against zone, we're talking about a player with an untapped ceiling. Like we're talking about, I have him currently as a top 25 talent, 88.5 grade. I mentioned that I had Luther Burden at a 90.0. I wouldn't be shocked by the end of this year if both of them were creeping on the 92 type of range.
Yeah, and I mean, he's expected to be a top 10 NFL draft pick, like you said. So there's not a whole lot more he can do from a draft capital standpoint to solidify where he's going. But I do feel pretty good about his abilities just in general. I think his game will translate well. We just need to see a little bit more consistency as a separator. That's my biggest thing. And if that happens, those target numbers will probably come up and that kind of thing. He has a great connection with his quarterback already. Him and Noah Fafita played in high school together. So they are probably going to be dialed in 35% type of target share this year.
Like I mentioned with Luther Burden, upside to be a number one do-it-all wide receiver like a Jamar Chase. With Tet McMillan, like I said, if he packs on some more muscle, gets a little bit even more physical than he currently is. Again, I mentioned Drake London. Maybe the overall ceiling would be your boy wearing 13 over in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, Mike Evans has actually notoriously not been a huge target share guy either, right? He's more of a big play red zone threat, and I think Tet McMillan kind of profiles the same way. So I'm going to pivot over to the 104 here, and I think this would be the first kind of inflection point of rookie drafts, at least currently for me right now, because I do see a small cluster of running backs closely ranked together with Ollie Gordon from Oklahoma State, Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State, and Omarion Hampton from North Carolina. You could maybe make the argument that if Carson Beck, quarterback of Georgia, who is consensus-wise, I would say the quarterback one in this class across NFL draft scouts that I've seen, if he goes first overall to the Las Vegas Raiders or something like that, you could see him come off the board here as high as like 104, 105. I'm not going to go in that direction because I do have a little bit of concerns with Carson Beck's ability to translate as a great fantasy quarterback. I think he more so profiles as like, if he has a great season this year, maybe he's like a Mac Jones plus type of prospect where he's probably going more so in the 105, 106, 107 range because he doesn't provide much with his legs. And again, all these other quarterbacks, Shadur Sanders, Connor Weigman, Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe, all these guys have a lot of work to do before they're considered first-round quarterbacks, in my opinion. Yeah. So I am going to stick at the running back position. I'm going to head over to Oklahoma State for my running back to Ollie Gordon. He has a great game, man. He had 1,700 rushing yards this year and over 50 targets. It is really hard to be that big of a workhorse, both on the ground and through the air. And Ollie Gordon stacks up very favorably to guys like Dalvin Cook and Alvin Kamara of years past, where they're 3-down guys. I mean, Ollie Gordon's profile is a little wonky from a size perspective because he's not the type of dude that's like 6'1", 230 pounds as this bigger back. He's a little bit tall. He's a little bit lanky built. He's like 6'1",
enough though.
15.
When you see him on the field, he looks a lot bigger than the listed 211.
He does. Yeah. I'm hoping he comes in around 220, 225 or whatever. Yeah. But I think Dalvin Cook is a good size profile comparison for him and a good athleticism profile comparison for him as well. And if you think of Dalvin Cook when he came out in 2017, he was probably supposed to go in the first round. He ended up slipping to round 2. I think that's kind of the projection for Ollie Gordon. Maybe he goes to round 1 in a team that needs like a lead running back. Your Cowboys come up as one of those teams. Yep. And then also maybe he could slide to the top of round 2, like say a Breece Hall caliber prospect or a Jonathan Taylor caliber prospect ended up doing. So for me, Ollie Gordon, I feel pretty confident saying that most NFL teams will view him as an early second round back or better, especially with a good season this year. He did actually get into some legal trouble recently where he had like a potential DUI or something like that. Maybe we'll see what comes of that. But for right now, I think Ollie Gordon projects pretty well as like a top 5 rookie pick right now. So that's where I'm going to take him here at 104.
And I would say outside or out of the, top 4 consensus running backs, if you guys watch the running back rankings video, you guys will know the exact 4 we're talking about. And to be honest, wouldn't be shocked if all 4 heard their name called on this video. But specifically with Ollie Gordon, I think he's arguably got the highest floor of all those guys, because the strengths I have listed here are just quite simply his translation to the next level. Professional running back, understands blocking scheme, defender/blocker leverage, always seems to pick the right gap. His vision was very impressive for being a newer starter at Oklahoma State. I believe he didn't even enter the year as a starter, picked it up midway through the season, and looked like a guy that's been running behind that offensive line for the last 3 years. I was really impressed with just how NFL ready he looked with such little experience under his belt. Has the natural build to develop into a true 3-down back, absorbs, finishes contact with ease. And what we want to see in fantasy, again, he's not the most refined receiver. We talked about just how explosive Ashton Genty is in the receiving game. You're not really getting that with Ollie Gordon, but what you are getting is an elite goal line back, a guy that will command goal line inside the 20 work in the NFL. And he is your prototypical between the tackle slasher. What I view of a guy like Ollie Gordon, again, people might hear, the last name of, of course you're, comping him to a guy with a similar last name, but I'm thinking of the prime Melvin Gordon in the Chargers days where he was a consistent RB1 in fantasy. Again, wasn't the most efficient running back in the league, wasn't the most efficient receiver in the league, but what was he giving you in terms of goal line equity? He was amongst the top scorers in the league on a year-to-year basis. If he lands in the right offense, we're talking about the Cowboys, we're talking about maybe the Houston Texans. They want to move on from Joe Mixon after the year. Ollie Gordon's got 15-plus rushing touchdown upside to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, all the comps that come up for him are all good. I mean, Ollie Gordon comped to Najee Harris, Dalvin Cook,
DeMarco Murray, I see a little bit too.
Yeah, exactly.
DeMarco.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a bunch of, I mean, having 50 targets is hard. Like, even if you're not a refined receiver, that production is translatable and usually predictive as well. So for me, Ollie Gordon represents too easy of a bet to pass on for a questionable quarterback prospect, or as much as I love, Emeka Egbuka at wide receiver, I'm sure we'll call his name pretty soon. Yeah. I think the value upside of having a top 5 to 10 dynasty running back in Ollie Gordon, who I think has a real chance to go in the first round of the NFL draft, and at the very least should be an early second round pick. I feel pretty confident and comfortable with that pick. So 105, which direction are you going?
See, I have my RB2 here on the board, but knowing my strategy, knowing that you have him at RB4, I'm going to take the last remaining receiver I would feel like personally valued in the mid-first round area. Again, you guys can make the claim of Evan Stewart, Trey Harris, Isaiah Bond. Maybe a couple of them will sneak into the end of the first round here. But for me, when I see Emeka Egbuka, I do see a little bit of a tier gap after him. Again, the way I see it is Luther and Ted are at the top. Emeka is kind of, safe as the number 3 guy for me now. And then 4 on kind of catching up to Emeka Egbuka. And when we're talking about Emeka Egbuka, again, listed at 6'1", 206 pounds, was able to watch his games 2023 versus Notre Dame, 2022 versus my Michigan Wolverines, 2022 versus Michigan State. And what you notice right off the bat, he's a good road runner from various spots, can win vertical down the field, especially from the slot. He's versatile enough to be both used out of the backfield and on design carries. We saw multiple times, especially in that Notre Dame game this year, that he was used in influence motion a ton, whether he was getting the ball, whether they were running between the tackles. He was the main attention grabber for that defense. Again, obviously Marvin Harrison, great in his own right, but the way they were using Emeka Egbuka is similar to that of a Deebo Samuel. It's similar to that of a DJ Moore, who, funny enough, DJ Moore actually ended up being my comp. But when you look at Emeka Egbuka's profile, it's kind of the glass half full versus the glass half empty. It depends what type of perspective you take on Emeka Egbuka. If you're the type of guy that's willing to forgive him for 2023, again, banged up this year, wasn't healthy really at all. We did see that take a toll on his efficiency metrics. 2023, 75.2 PFF receiving grade, 2.01 yards per route run, 76.9 receiving grade versus man, and overall lessened efficiency in 2023. But if you look at his 2022, you saw an 84.0 PFF receiving grade. You saw a guy that was able to put up 2.66 yards per route run against man and 3.36 yards per route run against zone. Really, if he's expected to go in the first round, which I think he's that caliber prospect, former 5-star recruit, very, very productive on the same field in 2022 as a young, true sophomore at the time with guys like Marvin Harrison Jr. on the field, I'm perfectly fine projecting Emeka Egbuka to have that bounce back type of year. Again, he's the type of guy where we're looking come 2025 offseason, he didn't really expand upon his 2022, 2023 seasons. We could be talking about a guy who falls. But if he just gets back to the level of 2022, I think he's a near first round lock. And he's the type of guy, like I said, that is the clear cut number 3 receiver for me at this current point.
Yeah, I mean, his prospect model comparisons are Garrett Wilson and AJ Brown right now. A guy that, probably goes in the late first round area, maybe the mid first round, early second round at the worst case scenario. I feel confident projecting him as a first round receiver because he does everything that translates at the NFL level. My comp for him was a bigger, more physical, and probably more athletic version of Jordan Addison. And Jordan Addison just had a 10 touchdown rookie season despite his quarterback missing half of the year. So I feel pretty confident in Emeka Egbuka there. 105, I probably would have gone in that direction as well. At 10, am I going 106 right now? Is that the pick that I'm? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to roll with Quinshon Judkins, running back of Ohio State, probably in store for a monster season this year. Him and Travion Henderson, of course, you could probably make the argument for either guy. But Quinshon Judkins has the physicality and the full status like goal line role that I think will translate to the NFL level. You mentioned kind of that skill set with Ollie Gordon. I do think that Judkins profiles very similarly to a guy like Ezekiel Elliott. Coming out of school, we know what he did his freshman season at Ole Miss as a sophomore, a little bit more of a down production season, but as a junior this year, I really expect him to have a monster year, whether it's from an efficiency standpoint, because him and Henderson are kind of sharing the backfield. Regardless, I think we're going to look at this backfield and be like, yeah, there's two day 2 caliber backs in this backfield. And for me, Judkins represents the highest ceiling of the two. So that is the guy that I'm going to roll with here at 106. And I feel pretty confident that he's going to translate and be an NFL workhorse because he handled a huge workload from day one at Ole Miss and was able to basically punch in touchdowns at will and rush the ball consistently. He drags defenders. He's a capable receiver, but not an elite receiver. And he has the type of ability that I think will translate.
Yeah, so you mentioned Ezekiel Elliott. My comp, oddly enough, again, people kind of have the stigma on these guys now because they're older guys with big touch workloads under their belt, but I have him comp to a guy like Joe Mixon. Again, if you look at his overall profile in terms of the efficiency, people may sour on him without actually watching the tape on him. They'll see, he's got the 14th highest PFF rushing grade amongst the guys that we watch, lower in terms of overall yards per route run, poor blocker, etc. At the end of the day, like you said, you have to watch these guys to get the context. When you watch Quinshon Judkins, what he is creating for himself is unlike any other running back in this class, barring maybe Ashton Genty. Like I said, you're going to look at the overall efficiency and think what's going on. But once you actually contextualize that 871 of his 1,159 rushing yards came after contact this year, he was getting hit in the backfield. He was getting hit, 2, 3, 4 yards behind the line of scrimmage consistently this past season. Do you think that's really going to be an issue working with the Ohio State offensive line on a top 3 overall team in the country this year?
No, probably not. And Joe Mixon, Travis Etienne, Nick Chubb, Javonte Williams, and Kenneth Walker are his best comparable players in the prospect model. And again, this year he could have a monster. Like the marks that he misses, like you said, are the efficiency marks in the prospect model. He doesn't miss the, volume commanding marks because he's been a workhorse from day one. But if he gets those efficiency marks this year at Ohio State, because it does take the best season numbers in the prospect model, he could end up really jumping up towards Ezekiel Elliott, Leonard Fournette, maybe even Saquon Barkley or Christian McCaffrey in the prospect model, because the efficiency marks he's going to get this year at Ohio State running behind that offensive line. So for 107, which direction are you going?
Yeah, and I kind of alluded to it, that I took the gamble that you would not take my RB2 and paid off. I was able to get Emeka Egbuka at the 105. Again, these are decision points you would have to make potentially if you have multiple 2025 first-round picks upcoming this year. But get Emeka Egbuka at the 105. 107, I turn around, take my RB2 in the class. Guy that isn't really getting the same buzz, Omarion Hampton, running back of the North Carolina Tar Heels, listed 5'11", 219 pounds, was able to watch his games this past season against Clemson, Georgia Tech, and Appalachian State. And the pros that I have listed here, the strengths I have listed here, he has absolute workhorse size at about 5'11", 220 pounds, elite contact balance, one of the most elusive backs in this class, which you see a running back of his build and you would think, power guy, doesn't really have the same type of shimmy in the open field. Not the case with Omarion Hampton. He is an absolute stud of an athlete. One of the pound-for-pound strongest players in college football is one note I have listed here. This guy runs violent. This guy runs behind his pads. He is, like I said, violent runner with great top-end speed between the tackles and super nimble for a 220-pound running back. The main weaknesses I have right now is that he's a very easy structured runner, but he isn't the most creative out of the top running backs in this upcoming class. He's got good but not great receiving skills, and he needs to improve as a pass blocker. In terms of his overall metrics, 90.6 PFF rushing grade, 4.22 yards after contact per attempt, third amongst the running backs I was able to watch in this cycle. 67 missed tackles forced on 254 carries and 35 10-plus yard runs for a bigger running back. This is going to sound outlandish. People are going to hear this comp, think, how are you comparing him to a Hall of Fame level running back? Again, this is not an apples to apples comparison, but when I watched Omarion Hampton this past season, I got reminded of Nick Chubb. Now, take it for what it is. He's my RB2 in the class. Again, to be RB2 in this class amongst all these top names we mentioned, we didn't even talk about Trevion Henderson, but we already mentioned the other three in the top four tier, if you will, with Quinshon Judkins, Ollie Gordon, and Ashton Denty. But man, Omari Hampton is an absolute special player. And you notice when you're watching Drake May that the receiving weapons weren't there, but God, did he have a dog in the backfield.
Yeah, his comps in the prospect model are Jonathan Brooks, Rashad Penny, Zach Charbonnet. Those numbers are decent. I mean, those guys all were like high-end draft picks, top 50 NFL draft picks. But if Hampton's able to, curb the efficiency as a receiver this year, he could definitely jump up all the way where Gordon and where Ashton Genty potentially are right now. And like I mentioned with Judkins, if he can improve his efficiency numbers as well. So yeah, these guys are dogs, man. These top four running backs are absolute dogs. And I feel confident saying that they'll all be top 50 NFL draft picks. And potentially we could see 2 or 3 of these guys go in round 1 of the NFL draft. Judkins and Hampton, Genty, and Gordon all projected to be top 50 NFL draft picks currently on NFL mock database. I think this is where I will take the quarterback with this next pick.
If you didn't, I would have.
Carson Beck here at the 108. Carson Beck is an interesting prospect. Like I said, I would say if I was a betting man right now, I would definitely take he's the first quarterback off the board type of bet because he's at a big school, obviously a big program. Everybody feels confident trusting the Georgia Bulldogs. And he was able to really come in as a year 1 starter after Stetson Bennett moves on to the NFL and come in 24 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 4th highest passing grade in the country this past year. Had basically one of the more accurate seasons we've seen. He was 80.6 adjusted completion percentage number, which I know just off the top of my head, looking at the career highs of the top 12 dynasty quarterbacks right now, that would be up there with the likes of like Tua Tagovailoa and guys that have had great real passing seasons in college football. Trevor Lawrence stands out as another one of those names there. So Carson Beck, not the type of guy that is going to rush the football, though. That is kind of the problem we have with Carson Beck versus, say, last year when we had Caleb Williams and Drake May and Jaden Daniels, of course, who really do provide a lot with their legs. Carson Beck, more so the type of quarterback that's going to beat you with his arm. 9.4 yards per attempt was an awesome, awesome number this year. So he's an efficient passer. He's the type of guy that I think NFL teams are going to like. I think he may draw comparisons to the likes of like a CJ Stroud if he has another great season this year. But more so right now, I kind of see him more in the line of like a right-handed Tua.
I see a Jared Goff, which is funny. You mentioned, the efficient, pocket quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. I think you can make the same case for Jared Goff. For the good of Jared Goff, where he has a clean pocket, he's able to deliver darts all up and down the field. With the negative, Jared Goff, where if the pocket were to break down, he's not the biggest creator. I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle for Carson Beck. Again, maybe we won't see it in spades playing with Georgia, big-time national champion favorite this upcoming season. Heck, my pick to win the national championship. I think Georgia is that good of a team. Can we see, like we saw with CJ Stroud, come a playoff game, maybe Georgia's down late, offensive line's kind of breaking down in front of him. Can Carson Beck create time in the pocket, deliver dots down the field? Especially not to mention the underrated thing as well is, although he's still got a solid set of wide receivers, guys like Dominic Lovett, I believe, are still there, correct? Dominic Lovett?
Yeah, I mean, the backfield, I'm sure, is what you're going to allude to, is that he's got Trevor Etienne now coming in from Florida and Branson Robinson coming back from injury. So the run game is like the problem with Carson Beck, I think, is that we're not going to really see much different of what we saw this past year, where he's the game manager kind of the offense. He's going to hand the ball off. Underratedly efficient as a runner last year. I mean, 178 yards, 4 touchdowns, 71.1 rushing grade. So let's see him unlock that a little bit more. Hopefully he plays in some big games this year, like you just said with Stroud, where he does actually have to move outside the pocket, because I'm not sure he's a bad athlete necessarily. He just hasn't been asked to do that.
Yeah, I think that's the exact response. I was going to say, like, as good as, like, Dominic Lovett projected to be this upcoming season, like, we still have to factor in, like you said, maybe it's a more run-based team, but he's also going to be operating without Brock Bowers, without Ladd McConkey on the field. So we see a little bit more, not quite the separation skills on the outside. Carson Beck kind of having to create on his own if he can take that next step. Again, for the value here at 108, man, you're potentially getting a top 5 overall pick, a quarterback. That just kind of goes to show you the strength of the running back and wide receivers at the top.
Yeah, I mean, the last time we got QB1 in a draft at 108 was like Kenny Pickett in 2022. And that was, again, due to the strength of the wide receivers and the top 2 running backs in that class. But Kenny Pickett, I would say, would be like a floor projection here for Carson Beck. I think he should be
for sure
a much better quarterback prospect than Pickett. Again, we don't know what Shedeur Sanders, Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe, whatever quarterback Connor Weigman that you like is going to do this year. Maybe Dylan Gabriel has a monster year at Oregon. But for me, I feel confident projecting that the quarterback position is not one that is highly selected in the 2025 NFL draft. And we saw that this year. I mean, Michael Penix and Bo Nix both went in the top 12 because I think NFL teams are aware that the 2025 NFL draft is not ripe with quarterback talent. So you're on the board here at 109. Let's see if we can rattle off these last few picks here.
Yeah, and I'm going to go a little bit off the board. If you guys are just following, Debbie blindly and kind of expecting, the Evan Stewart, the Trevion Henderson here, don't worry. Those guys will probably be selected within the next few picks anyways. But guy that we both agreed upon as the wide receiver 4 in the class, a guy that quite literally mossed Travis Hunter, put up 13 for 294 against Travis Hunter in those Colorado Buffaloes. I'm talking about Elik Iomanner, I believe is the way to pronounce the name. Again, you're going to know the pronunciation.
Elik Iomanner, I believe, is how his name is pronounced.
Elik Iomanner. And when I expected going into his tape was to see a big wide receiver that doesn't have the quite refinement, especially given his overall experience level, only 1 full year playing for Stanford this past season. But what I took away, man, is this guy is a straight dog. This guy is a straight baller. Fantastic hands. Again, well built, 6'2", 210 pounds. Was able to watch him against Colorado and against Washington. Fantastic hands. Very, very powerful after the catch runner. Athletic with this well-built frame, like I said. And he's a bully in the run game. The vibes I got when I was watching this guy play were that of a Chris Godwin power slot, where the projection at the next level, sure, again, does he idealize to be that power slot role? Absolutely. But can he play on the outside in pinches? Can he be, this bully against press coverage? I absolutely see that in the range of outcomes. When we're talking about him, again, like I said, good footwork and technique in his release package at the line of scrimmage, which is why I think he can be able to hand NFL level press. First year player at Stanford. I think he's got so much room to grow this upcoming season. And like I said, for a power slot role, he is absolutely tough as nail. Think about your Chris Godwin. Think about your Amon St. Brown, your, A.J. Brown light, in the sense that when these guys line up in the slot and they're able to catch the ball across the middle of the field, you're not worried about their safety. You're worried about the defensive back safety who are trying to bring them down.
Yeah, absolutely. He doesn't stack up super well in the prospect model right now, mainly because he is projected to be a 3rd round NFL draft pick according to NFL Mock Database. Not to mention too, I mean, he was coming off a blown ACL last year, and he still had these monster flashes, these monster games. He's the definition of the type of player that you bet on heading into their junior season. Because again, I'm not adjusting the fact that they still have another year of college football to play in the wide receiver model specifically. So it's very possible that he does climb up to that Chris Godwin territory, that Michael Pittman Jr. territory potentially. Yep. But I actually think he might be faster than both of those players. Like, I really expected to watch Michael Wilson. I mean, to helmet scout him a little bit, but I did not see Michael Wilson. I saw a guy with a lot more
juice,
wiggle, a lot more juice, a lot more athletic tools, and a guy who was a lot more refined at the line of scrimmage, even though I think Michael Wilson, that was probably his best trait, was his release package. I think that whatever they're doing with these Stanford wide receivers, they're actually teaching them how to beat press coverage at a pretty high level. So yeah, Iomanner, I probably wouldn't have taken him here. I probably would have gone running back, but I do think that 109, decent value for him at that point.
Yeah. The way I kind of saw it is I viewed the next 2 names, or the next 3 names in total, to be between Iomanner, Evan Stewart, and Trevion Henderson. Spoiler alert. But I wanted to get out in the curve, because if I didn't take Iomanner, I knew you were going to.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to go back to Ohio State, and I'm going to take Trevion Henderson here. Here at the 110 or 109? 110.
110. Yep.
110. Okay. So Trevion Henderson, I'm going to roll with Ohio State running back. Probably should have come out last year, but maybe the NFL community or whatever was worried about his injury history. He needs to stay healthy this year. I think he probably will, knowing that Quinshon Judkins will probably keep him fresh in this backfield. Electric talent in terms of athleticism. He is a 4.3 runner at the running back position. He's probably, 5'10", 215 is his listed size. He does remind me a little bit of former Ohio State Buckeye J.K. Dobbins. You had DeAndre Swift. I believe was his comp for him. Cam Akers was another guy that stood out to me when I watched this dude. He is lacking a little bit of refinement, more of a home run hitter style of running back, but the receiving skill set, the freshman season of production that we saw from this guy last time he was fully healthy in 2021 on a field with Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, he was a priority in that offense, and that is difficult to do as a freshman. I feel confident that TreVeyon Henderson is going to be a guy that the NFL teams like, especially if he stays healthy this year. So a guy that I project for top 50, top 75 NFL draft capital. And in this class, being RB5 is no disrespect. I mean, it's just a good running back class, and he's the top of the next tier for me. So I'm going to go with Henderson here.
Yeah, I love that pick as well. Like I said, I would have considered him at my last pick as well. Game-breaking explosiveness and speed at his compact size. Fantastic receiver out of the backfield. Slips contact well. Now, I will say you did see his efficiency metrics from his true freshman campaign versus his true junior campaign. Did slide a good amount. Again, like you said, injuries have kind of piled up these last couple of years. He's a tough guy. He's been battling some lower body injuries literally from 2022 and 2023. Guy that always wants to get out on the field, but sometimes it comes at his own body's detriment, because you did see the efficiency marks, 3.68 yards after contact per attempt in 2023 versus 4.31 as a true freshman. If you were to take his efficiency metrics as a true freshman and apply it to an older, junior type of workload, like we're talking about, if you were to take those efficiency metrics and put them on a 250, 280 touch workload, we're talking about a guy that would be in consideration to be a top 3, top 4 overall running back in this class. Again, at this current point, with the injuries baked in, with the overall efficiency metrics where they currently are, I don't think you can rank him above any of the other top 4 running backs. But at this current point, I think he's the clear 5.
Yeah, if we just inverted his prospect profile, we'd probably feel a lot differently about him going into this year. It's difficult when you have that great freshman season and you fail to build upon that. It reminds me a little bit of like what Tank Bigsby did as a rookie or as a freshman at Auburn. And you don't want to see that, especially knowing that you were playing at Ohio State. Like you had CJ Stroud in 2022, again, dealt with injuries, didn't have that great of a season. And then in 2023, the quarterback play was worse, but it's not like the offense was bad. I mean, Marvin was still productive and that type of thing. So TreVeyon Henderson, 110 for me. We roll to you with the 111.
Yeah, and last quick note I'll make on TreVeyon Henderson. You mentioned his receiving skill set. If there's one thing I am fully confident on translating to the next level, it is going to be that receiving skill set. 1.48 yards per route run in 2023, 73.6 PFF receiving grade with a 70.3 pass block grade. That's the other underrated factor, is that despite being, a sub 210-pound running back listed at 208, I got him at here, he is a dog in the pass protection game. So another quick note, last note on TreVeyon Henderson. I'll go to my 111 here. I kind of alluded to Evan Stewart when I made the Elic Iomanor pick, but he will be my pick here. Wide receiver now of the Oregon Ducks. And this is another complete context player. If you just look at his profile in terms of efficiency, you're going to be left a little underwhelmed. 73.7 PFF receiving grade, not the greatest. 2.14 yards per route run, 62.2 receiving grade versus man. But when you turn on the tape, you just see a natural mover. Again, only listed at 5'11", 174. So he would have to be a good mover in order to be ranked this high. But what I have listed here, extremely smooth and fluid mover, very, very good deep speed. Hands are elite, will catch everything thrown in his vicinity despite a small frame. Flashes of extremely good route running, even though the consistency at this point isn't quite there. And the other thing I noticed, man, despite being a smaller receiver, again, people will throw the Devontae Smith comps at him because of the high-end route running that he displays at times. And also because he is tough as nails. He is willing to high point the football through traffic. Again, 5'11", 174, reaching above his head, coming down over top on his neck. Like, no matter who's around him, he's going to jump up and he's going to attack the football. Again, you'll see the Devontae Smith comps. I can't quite get there yet because Devontae Smith was so consistent on a down-to-down basis as a route runner. But you do see the high flashes of potential with Evan Stewart. If he's really to hone in his game, if he's really to get more consistent this upcoming year, working with Dylan Gabriel, working with a top 5 level Oregon offense, I think he could be a big riser. Again, people might even put him higher than we do, might have him as the wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 of the class. He's my tentative 5 at this point, simply because I need to see it first before I fully put him up there. But the flashes, no doubt, would lend itself to a first-round caliber receiver. My comp for him is actually Jordan Addison.
Yeah, I think he has a real chance to have a monster season at Oregon this year. Texas A&M was kind of a mess. He was dealing with injuries as a sophomore. Great freshman season. Obviously, you want to see him build on that as a junior. So I don't really have any qualms with the pick. I probably would have stuck at the running back position, knowing that the class is a little bit stronger at the top. versus, once we get into Evan Stewart and Trey Harris and, Juice Wells and Nick Anderson, Isaiah Bond, there's a lot more question marks about the wide receiver position in the middle tiers outside of the guys that we've talked about so far. I think they're fine prospects, but they're more so guys I would want to get in round 2 of a rookie draft as opposed to guys I would want to spend a late first rounder on. So closing out this thing, we got the 112 for me on the board here. Do I want to go? I can go in a number of different directions. I could go with QB2, which to me is Shadur Sanders of Colorado right now. Potentially Jackson Dart, I think, could have a big season at Ole Miss this year with Judkins out. He could have a season where he opens up the offense. Trey Harrison, Antoine Wells for him on the outside. I mentioned Dylan Gabriel at Oregon could have a big season with Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson this year. There's not really a tight end, I would say, that is worthy of a first-round pick in this class. I mean, Colson Loveland of Michigan. I mean, you have Luke Lachey of Iowa, of course, been a tight end factory. Oscar Delpit potentially sliding into Georgia's role for Brock Bowers there. I don't think any of those guys belong in round 1, and this is not really the year to need a tight end, I would say.
Hey, once the tight end shows it in their eligible year, that's when I'm fine moving them into the late first, early second portion of a mock. But once you're projecting at this point, which we currently are, and again, so much as of a Colson Loveland Michigan fan I am, we need to see that year of production before I feel comfortable taking them over some of these running back and wide receiver projections.
Yeah, I mean, it's not often we see Michael Mayer and Brock Bowers type of underclassmen anyway, where they're producing at a high level as freshmen and sophomores. So I'm going to stick at the running back position, and I could go a number of different directions here. I'm going to stand for my guy here at 112 here. I'm going to roll with Damian Martinez, running back now of Miami, formerly of Oregon State. The reason I'm rolling with him over, say, Raheem Sanders, who I like, Trevor Etienne of Georgia, who I like, Devin Neal of Kansas, who I like. There's a number of guys that you could go, Jordan James and some of these other guys that could have big breakout seasons. The reason I'm going with Damian Martinez here is because, I mean, outside of a receiving skill set, I think he does everything at a very, very high level. 2 years as a true freshman, as a true sophomore of workhorse usage at Oregon State, where he was efficient, he was physical, he was able to make people miss. He has great size. I mean, he's like 6 foot, 230 pounds. If he can tack on some receiving production to his profile going into his junior season at Miami, I feel very confident that we're talking. I mean, right now he's kind of like a Chris Carson, but if we add some receiving production to his profile, maybe he becomes Najee Harris or somebody like that, where you look at a guy who's big, who's physical, who can make people miss, who actually has a bit of a receiving skill set to him. Because I do think he has a good wiggle to his profile. Some receiving production could go a long way to that, like Ramondre Stevenson, Najee Harris type of comparison. But right now, very good in between the tackles runner, who I feel confident, honestly, NFL teams will view him as like a 3rd round pick, like kind of where Trey Benson and Blake Corum were viewed by the NFL this year. I could see him being in that kind of vein for the NFL draft. Again, the late first round of rookie drafts this year is a little bit shaky. It's a little bit more questionable than it was in 2024, where we had all those great projections at wide receiver. You had Bo Nix and Michael Penix going there. This year, we're projecting a little bit at the end of the first round in 2025.
Yeah, and that kind of played into my decision with Evan Stewart, because I will say, outside of once Evan Stewart's off the board for me, again, I know you don't even have him inside your top 5. He actually was my 5th overall, 5 wide receivers selected in this mock. But with Evan Stewart after him, again, Trey Harris, a little bit of a projection, Isaiah Bond, Nick Anderson, some of the guys that we mentioned on the wide receiver rankings video, a little bit more of a projection. And although I do think Damian Martinez is a bit of a projection here, again, a guy I have still inside my top 10, you still need to see the 3-down skill set. Again, at this point, like you said, because it's such an ambiguous 112 situation, taking your guy at this current portion and betting on improvements in the season is the way to go. Like you said, if Damian Martinez has the receiving profile we would have expected him these last couple of years, this upcoming year declares for the draft after having a 30 reception year at Miami, we could very well plug him into top 64 overall draft capital. So far, without the receiving production on his profile, he kind of reminds me of like a Latavius Murray with more wiggle. And people might be hearing that like, oh, like Latavius Murray, that's a stinky back, because they think of him in these last couple of years. Prime Latavius Murray was an absolute dog. Prime Latavius Murray was a guy getting over 200 NFL carries, giving you over 30, 40, 50 NFL targets. If you're telling me right now you can get a prime Latavius Murray in terms of his rookie contract from Damian Martinez, I'm taking that as a win every single time.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like he has nothing on his receiving profile. He had 20 targets this past year. He averaged over 11 yards per reception, 126 yards on 11 catches. I just look at a guy who had a 90 PFF rushing grade as a freshman and an 88.1 PFF rushing grade as a sophomore, and I loved his film. I thought he was a great player. I'll let you have an honorable mention here. Who would you have gone with at 112?
Yeah, who would I have gone with? It would have been a question again. If you guys watched the running back rankings video, you'll know that I'm a little bit more contrarian at the top at running back here. Jonah Coleman, running back from Washington, as my 6. Jordan James, running back from Oregon, as my 7. Doesn't feel great taking those guys in the first round right now, knowing that we kind of want to see the year of production before we have to put the pen to paper on selecting them for a team in this hypothetical. If I had to make a selection, it would probably end up being Shedeur Sanders, knowing that the first round equity is possible here. Again, if you check NFL mock draft database, he's currently projected as the 9th overall pick. Again,
I think that's hype based. Personally, I don't think most
agree.
draft scouts think he's a first round quarterback, but he could be. If he has a good season this year, he could be one.
But if you're telling me, again, 9th overall seems a little bit fugazi, even if he went 27 overall in the NFL draft, at this point, am I taking the 27th overall selected quarterback versus the RB, 7 off the board or the wide receiver 6 off the board? I would probably just lean the quarterback equity there, knowing that, again, Shedeur Sanders, dual threat player, is able to create out a structure. If he lands in the first round, let's just say, again, doomsday scenario, I'm not wishing this into existence, but if the Cowboys are stupid enough to let Dak Prescott go and they're like, Deion's our boy, Ring of Honor, let's go, let's draft his son. Like, again, people are going to point to that scenario. I think there's about a 2% chance of that actually happening, but we're living in make-believe land doing this 2025 early mock. Let's kind of play out that scenario hypothetically.
Yeah, I think you guys would probably have to have a pretty disastrous season where Dak walks, maybe he gets hurt or something, and they don't want to re-sign him. I could see that happening, but like you said, probably not the most likely scenario. So we talked about, 13, 15 prospects in this video. We did go way more in depth on the running back class and the running backs 1 to 8 and 9 to 16 video, and the wide receivers 1 through, 12, 15 guys that we talked about in that video as well. We didn't do a video on the quarterbacks. I don't think we're going to, because honestly, there's just a huge question mark around all these guys. Again, Texas A&M, Connor Weigman has a chance to have a big season this year.
Ward.
Jalen Milroe from Alabama is the most intriguing from a fantasy perspective, but he also is not the most accurate and the most consistent passer. Jackson Dart, I really like from Ole Miss as well, as a guy that's kind of in the middle who can run and throw the ball at a pretty high level. So there's upside in this quarterback class, but I would say if I had to set the over-under on how many quarterbacks we get in round 1, I would say it's probably 1.5, 2.5 at absolute most.
Yeah, I would agree with that. 1.5 seems like the money spot right now, because I feel very confident.
I think I would take the over if it was 1.5, because I think one of Sanders and these other guys could sneak in there. I think Beck is the only one that I would say, as of right now, I would bet my house on that he is going to be a first rounder.
Like, if we're looking at some of the names, like you said, you mentioned a couple of them. Garrett Nussmeier had a big-time bowl game once Jaden Daniels declared for the NFL draft. We were able to see him connect with Brian Thomas. Maybe he has another breakout year. Donovan Smith from Houston. Again, I would be shocked if, Cade Klubnik was in this discussion, but he wasn't highly.
We didn't even mention Quinn Ewers. I'm literally a Texas fan.
Yeah.
NFL draft scouts seem intrigued by Quinn Ewers because he has a great release and he's, sometimes plays at a high level, but
he's got the aesthetic.
I think Arch Manning doesn't transfer. Him not transferring means that Quinn is on a short leash, is my opinion.
Yeah, it's like he's like the quarterback version of looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane, in the sense that he looks like Tarzan with the bad
player. I don't think he's a bad player. He is not a consistent enough quarterback, nor do I ever think he will be, unless we see a massive step forward from Quinn Ewers this year, which is unlikely considering he lost his top 2 receivers, his tight end and his running back in the NFL draft this past year. I would be shocked if he is even the starter for Texas by week 10.
Wait, so you're saying he didn't just replace Xavier Worthy with Xavier Worthy? Is that not what happened?
No, Isaiah Bond's not Xavier Worthy. We didn't replace A.D. Mitchell. We didn't replace Jatavian Sanders, really. I mean, C.J. Baxter and the other backs could probably replace
Peyton
Brooks
Blue,
like they did last year, but I think Texas's offense won't be nearly as potent this year.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I will say, though, you guys overall have a good team projection, but at the end of the day, when we're just specifically rooting it to Quinn Ewers' NFL validity, I think he's more of a day 2 guy rather than a day 1 guy, because quite frankly, the volatile nature of his down-to-down, throw-to-throw basis is way too expanded for a first-round caliber quarterback, in my opinion.
I think he's going to get benched by midway through the season, and he's going to transfer and play another year of college. I think that's exactly what's going to happen to Quinn Ewers and be in the 2026 draft. And maybe he has like a Bo Nix caliber career or something like that, and maybe he goes in round 1 later on. But for me, I would be shocked if he ended up being QB1 or QB2 in this class, because he's got arm talent, but he also isn't like the biggest guy in the world. He's not really the most mobile guy in the world either. He's okay in those areas, but he's nothing special there. So that is the end of this video. We basically broke down a 2025 rookie mock draft. Again, if you guys did enjoy this video, if you got some value from it, leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Who are we too low on? Comment it down below. Who are we too high on? Comment it down below. And of course, for more dynasty and rookie content and dynasty rankings and all that kind of stuff, our dynasty trade value chart just saw a huge update going into training camps. So check that out over on flockfantasy.com. Use the promo code FSE when you sign up for 7 days for free, 30% off any of the packages, as well as a free team review when you sign up for an annual Mother Flocker subscription using that promo code FSE. We'll break down your team, talk about if you're rebuilding, if you're contending, all the trades that you could potentially make, because we can see on our My Teams feature exactly who has who in your league. How good does your team stack up to the rest of your league? All that stuff covered in the team review stuff. So definitely check that out if you're interested. All the dynasty and rookie content you could need. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.